Good evening and welcome to EconVersations. I'm Dan Sutter with the Johnson Center for Political Economy here at Troy University. The world economy may be on the verge of an exciting new innovation. Something called Bitcoin has arisen that offers the potential to possibly reshape how we undertake financial transactions and the participation of people in the world economy. Talk a little bit about this new payment system, or possibly money, and what it might mean for our economy is my colleague from the Johnson Center, Dr. Malavika Nair. Welcome, Mal.
Thanks for having me.
So could you explain briefly what exactly is Bitcoin? I know it's something electronic, and so not too technical, because someone like me who has trouble programming our DVR, what exactly is Bitcoin all about?
Okay, so Bitcoin is a digital currency, and it is something that is created as a result of basically a computer protocol, or a set of rules. And these Bitcoins are mined in a way that there's only so many of them that can ever exist. There's only so many. It's about 21 million is the number that it's capped at. It's pre-coded, it's pre-programmed. And the way it works is that it's completely peer-to-peer. So there's no need for a third party or an intermediary to watch over online transactions anymore.
And that seems to be the important innovation here, because Bitcoin is very different from Facebook, right? Or not for Facebook currency, or I guess PayPal's payment system.
Right. There's no one person creating Bitcoin, and there's no one person watching over Bitcoin. The transactions are watched over by this worldwide network. You basically run this program on your computer, and that's how it watches over every transaction that happens. So it's a completely decentralized network. It's something that's not really existed before.
When did Bitcoin come about?
So it came about in 2009, and it was created by Satoshi Nakamoto, and that's a pseudonym. We suppose. We don't know who this person really is, but he created this program and he put it online, and it's a completely open source software, so it's open for anybody to go and read and review, and even to change.
Okay.
That's how it's set up. And it didn't really gain much popularity with people up until last year, when we saw this huge run-up in Bitcoin price, and that's when it got a lot of attention. Before that, it was basically a lot of computer geeks or entrepreneurs who were basically interested in it, but it's really beginning last year when it's gotten a lot of attention.
Yeah, so I guess this sign for realtors for companies that want to accept Bitcoin in payment. And I know there was recently announcements that Overstock.com became like the first major retailer to actually go ahead and accept Bitcoin for payment, right?
Yeah. And that was huge. Overstock.com is one of the first big retailers online who are starting to accept it, and that's a big deal. What's interesting is that online retailers have a huge advantage of accepting Bitcoin. So it's not that they're only accepting Bitcoin, they're accepting regular credit cards, PayPal, along with Bitcoin. And the advantage to online retailers of accepting Bitcoin is that they don't have to pay a 3% merchant fee to the credit card company anymore. If anything, it's maybe a 1% merchant fee, or it's much lower, because there's these Bitcoin companies which process Bitcoin payments. So for online retailers, it's a huge benefit to use Bitcoin or to accept it.
Now, you mentioned that it's been around for a few years, but it's only really been in the last year or so that it's taken off. And I think we have a graph here showing the Bitcoin price over the last 2 years. And I think we don't have the numbers showing here, but do you know about where these
it's about today, I think it's about $900. And it saw a run up in price starting in, you can see, November 2013. Before that, it was pretty stable for some time. Last year, it was at about $120, $130 a Bitcoin. But starting the last 2 months, it's seen this huge run up, and it seems to be stabilizing. I mean, it seems to be around the $1,000 mark. So that's really interesting to see.
Now, if retailers are starting to accept Bitcoins for payment, does this mean that Bitcoin is money? And if so, I mean, what's backing the value of this money? The way you're explaining it is just like this seemingly a number of computer geeks came together, they wrote this program, And now these Bitcoins are worth like almost $1,000 a piece. So how is this really money?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and that kind of goes back to, what is money? We have to kind of understand what money is. And money is defined as something that is a generally accepted medium of exchange. And a medium of exchange is just something that you buy or you acquire in order to sell again. So basically people use money or hold on to money only because they want to sell it or buy things with it. Money by itself has no use. You don't consume money. It's not like a house. It's not like a car. You don't use it directly. The only use money ever has is as a medium of exchange. And that means you only use it when you give it away and you buy things with it. Now, we can only define something to be a money if it is being used widely and it's being generally accepted. And based on that criteria, Bitcoin maybe isn't quite there yet. Maybe we can't call it a widely accepted medium of exchange yet, but it certainly has these properties that lend to it becoming a well-used medium of exchange.
No, what would probably strike people today is very odd is that this is to the extent that it is a money, it's not a money that's been created by any government. Like our U.S. dollars are a product of the United States government, and the British pound and the euro have all been created by governments across the world. And so this might strike us as very odd. How can something that no government has created or given a stamp of approval to actually have any value or serve as money?
Well, we typically think of government as creating money, but the truth is that governments actually did not create money, because money is ultimately what money does. It's its function, and the government can't force people. They can define something as money, but they can't force people to use it in exchange, to use it as a medium of exchange. That only comes about when people themselves choose to use it as a medium of exchange. And in fact, money has evolved over thousands of years spontaneously through trade, through the needs of trade. Well, money, why would anybody use money, right? I mean, the question is, if the end of using money is just to buy the things you want, why don't you just go buy the things you want? Why go through this intermediary? Why use this medium, right? It seems inefficient to do that. Well, the answer is that it's not inefficient. It actually helps you buy more things. It helps you cut down drastically on the search costs that would be involved in finding exactly the person or exactly the thing that you wanted to buy. If all we had was barter, trade would be a lot harder, and that's exactly where money comes in, and money solves that problem spontaneously.
So these are some pictures here of different things that have served as money in different countries or different societies over time. And of course, gold, and I know the one on the bottom right here, these large stone fei that I think are my favorite form of commodity money. And so we've actually seen then money arise in various different forms all across the world, right? So this is not something new in any way with what might be emerging with Bitcoin. No,
not at all. In fact, just like you said, money has arisen spontaneously in many places around the world. Even today, you can see primitive tribes. If you go and see them, they typically have a spontaneous money. There's no government saying this is money, this is the value of money. And even the dollar has only through a very long historical process become the dollar that we see today. The dollar today is fiat money, but it wasn't even 100 years ago. So it wasn't pure fiat money.
What's a fiat money?
So a fiat money is a money that gets its value purely from the government saying that this is a dollar, or the government backing the value. So there has to be one person, and everybody has to be able to trust the government. So essentially, the dollar is getting its value from the fact that everybody does trust the government to back it. And that's where it's getting its value from. Something like gold or commodity money, nobody has to trust one person. All you have to do is trust the value of the commodity. So the value is coming from the value that the commodity has, and that value typically comes from all the things that commodity can be used for. So gold has so many different uses, and that is where essentially the money gets its value from.
So something can work as a money essentially if other people will
if other people see value in it, it can work as a money, and that's really the basis.
Now, you use this term spontaneous order and to describe money, and I know Carl Menger's I guess, the pioneer of the Austrian School of Economics, but he also talked about this process by which money comes about. So why is this important for us to be able to understand how it is that money comes about without, say, the government being involved or spontaneously?
Well, yeah, Karl Menger, he explained that money was a social institution, just like something like language or like law and order. It's something that is a social institution and that evolves and that is capable of evolving on its own in a society. And it's not something that a government needs to create and that a government needs to back up. That it comes about through the actions of people who are trying to, make their lives better, to interact with other people, to trade with other people. And money is just a social institution that evolves spontaneously, naturally, to fix that problem. And this is interesting because we can think of Bitcoin in the same light. We can kind of see that Bitcoin as well is something that has evolved spontaneously, and it's something that there's no government backing it, and yet so many people seem to be using it, and so many people seem to be trusting it. Because in a sense, all you need to trust, you don't need to trust any one person. All you need to trust is the code, and that the code checks out. And thousands of computer geeks have gone and tried to hack the code, and they haven't been able to do it. The code does check out, and that's where all of this value is coming from.
Now, actually, then Menger went beyond just looking at money as this example of a spontaneous order to. The Austrian school argues that the entire economy is this type of spontaneous order. So money is just like one example of a spontaneous order within a larger spontaneous order, right?
Exactly. So even things like law, the rules, right? The rules that we need to enforce trade, even those things are capable to be, come about spontaneously. And that just because we don't have a government enforcing certain things doesn't mean we're going to have lawlessness. That's not necessarily true. There's many examples of societies coming up with their own laws and finding ways to enforce those laws so that trade can carry on and that we can have prosperity. And
so we certainly have seen examples of this spontaneous evolution, and that's, I guess, an important point to keep in mind, because every time we see something that looks like it's been ordered in our economic lives, it's not necessarily the result of anybody's intention or anybody's explicit efforts.
Right, exactly. There can be a lot of order that comes about without design necessarily, and that's kind of important to understand, because we don't always need a new law to be passed by government, or we don't always need, certain things to be in place so that we get progress. Society is very capable, and people and entrepreneurs specifically are very capable of bringing about progress.
And yet, at the same time, even though it's a spontaneous process, there's a lot of coordination or order, actually.
Exactly.
I guess the other side of the term spontaneous order is the order part of it, right?
Yeah.
Things end up getting coordinated
exactly.
and working
because
well.
Because the incentives check out, right? I mean, so entrepreneurs have an incentive to provide things that will make society better off, because that's the only way that they can make money. So that's what provides for coordination. That's what allows for coordination, for plans to be coordinated.
Now, you mentioned that today we live in a world where most of our, I guess all of our currencies or all of our monies in the world have been created by governments.
Or they're backed by governments.
Or backed by the governments. So they've come, they are now like these fiat monies. So what are some of the drawbacks that we see with government-backed or government-operated monetary systems?
Well, for one, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's always a risk of inflation, because governments, if there's just one agency backing a certain currency, they have the power to create that currency, basically, out of thin air. So if there's a fiat money, and it's usually paper currencies, the cost to print paper is nothing, right? It's minimal, but the benefit of doing that to the government can be huge. So there's always this risk of huge inflation, which is not true with commodity money, because a commodity is very scarce. So if you think of gold, gold is very difficult to mine. It's very scarce. You can't find it easily, right? So the value of that stays stable typically over time, because it's very hard to find, and no one person has control over it. And that is really I think why Bitcoin is so attractive to a lot of people, because it's decentralized and no one agency controls its supply. The supply is prefixed, there's no way to increase that supply, and there's even a code or a formula for how many Bitcoins are created every year. So it's estimated that the last Bitcoin will be created at some point in 2140, in the year 2140. And we know that it's going to follow this path and there's no way to change it. And that adds a lot of certainty, and that helps add to the value of the money.
And so I mean, the code is such that even though obviously somebody had to decide there was going to be 21 million Bitcoins initially, there's no way for somebody to go in now and decide, well, let's make it 22 million, and I'll take the extra million Bitcoins.
No, not without imploding the code. I mean, it's like a set of equations. I mean, you can't change one thing. The whole thing, there's no way you can do that.
And that's, I'm sure, way beyond my capability, but people have checked this out, and it seems to be true, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that all the programmers around the world have tried to hack this, or tried to figure out how to get
the first people who got interested in it tried to hack it. I mean, that's why they got interested in it. They tried to break it, and that was all the first, adopters were all computer geeks who had tried to break it and they couldn't. And then they saw this value in it, and that's and that's the real story here.
You've mentioned gold and the role of gold, and I think certainly a number of folks who think that the United States should return to a gold standard have always point to this danger of government-backed monies and inflation resulting from them. And so in many ways it seems like there's some possibility for Bitcoin to serve the role that some folks think that we should see with gold. And so to what extent could Bitcoin be, say, a substitute for gold, or if people were wanting us to return to a gold standard, it could end up being like a Bitcoin type system instead?
Yeah, I mean, there is a chance that could happen. If you look at the price of gold, it's it has fluctuations and it has volatility, as does the Bitcoin price. But Bitcoin, in fact, I think has a few maybe advantages over gold, because gold, the supply is not fixed in the sense that the Bitcoin supply is. We don't know, if somebody could chance upon a huge gold supply somewhere in the world, and that could really change, send a lot of volatility into the price. Gold is also a physical commodity, so it's expensive to store, and it's the value to weight ratio is very high. So it's dangerous to have a bunch of gold lying around. You typically have to use an intermediary to keep your gold safe. So again, those are all added costs into moving back towards gold. Bitcoin, on the other hand, again, there are resources that go into keeping it safe, but it's nothing like the resources that go into keeping gold safe.
Now, who would be some of the people who could benefit from using Bitcoin here in the near future, even if it doesn't actually evolve into a money? Who's likely to benefit? You mentioned already the idea of it could be a substitute for credit cards. So could you expand on that point and talk about some of the other folks that might benefit from having access to Bitcoin? So
that's the big one, the credit cards, because Bitcoin allows for merchants to accept money without having to pay this 3% merchant fee, and 3% on every sale adds up for, it's a huge amount.
This is on top of, so when you or I use our credit cards, the merchant is paying 3%.
The merchant.
We don't have to pay it.
We don't know this, right? We don't feel it. We don't feel this end of it. But every time we use a credit card to pay with something, it's not even online. Every time you swipe your credit card at Starbucks, Starbucks has to pay 3% of a merchant transaction fee to Visa, MasterCard, PayPal. And Bitcoin allows that transaction fee to be completely eliminated or to be shrunk by a huge amount. Another thing that Bitcoin lets you do is it eliminates basically the risk of fraud, because there's no identity or sensitive information changing hands when you're paying with Bitcoin online. So every year there's billions of dollars that are lost because of identity theft and online fraud and online and chargebacks and stuff like that, and all of that gets eliminated. So merchants really will see a huge advantage in starting to accept Bitcoin. Now, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for consumers, right? Because how does it make a difference to me whether I swipe my credit card or I pay with Bitcoin, right? Because I'm not the one who was paying the merchant fee in the first place, so why should I care? Well, one thing is that it is safer. you're not having to, share anonymous or sensitive information. It can be made anonymous. But also, I think the big change will come if these merchants start passing on some of these savings to consumers, like you and me. So if they say, look, if you pay with dollars, it's $5. If you pay with Bitcoin, you just have to pay the equivalent of $4. And that, because they're saving money if you pay with Bitcoin and they're passing on those savings to you, I think that will be a huge turning point into seeing Bitcoin adoption amongst people like you and me.
Now, beyond that, there's people have written that this is going to actually be able to expand the number of people worldwide who could be part of our international financial system. How is that going to work? Yeah,
because there's so many people all over the world who don't have access to the financial system. They don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit cards, they don't have debit cards. Bitcoin allows you to take part in online commerce without any of that. All you need is the internet, and you can pay and buy and sell with Bitcoin, and that's huge. It's huge. We don't think about it here in the United States, but it's huge for many people in a lot of developing countries in the world, that you can buy things online, you can sell things online, and that makes a big difference to a lot of people.
And another aspect of that is that in some countries, it's actually very difficult for people to get foreign currencies to be able to participate. Can you explain that a little bit to our viewers, these restrictions and how Bitcoin might be a way to get around them?
Yeah, well, I mean, with Bitcoin, all you need is really, you need, an account, you need an internet connection, and that's it, really. You can buy Bitcoin locally in every country in the world. You have Bitcoin exchanges where you can, swap your currency for Bitcoin, right? Without having to go through your government, without having to, many governments place a lot of exchange controls, right? And they strictly limit the amount of foreign exchange that their citizens can buy. But with Bitcoin, it's all online. You can buy and sell Bitcoin just straight through your computer, right? And there's no way to control that. And that allows people a lot more flexibility.
So in some countries, people simply can't take their local currency and like exchange it for
no, they can't. Right?
For dollars or euros.
We don't even think about that. That's a big problem for a lot of people.
And then how about if you live in a country where there's a lot of inflation? Can Bitcoin transactions be a way to get around this?
Of course, because in a country where there's a lot of inflation, and if the government is placing a lot of controls right at the point where there's a lot of inflation, so this was happening in Argentina, and this is a real world example. A lot of people were converting their assets into Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin doesn't have to be in any one country, right? It's on the internet, and it allows you to protect your assets or the value of your assets by being able to sell them and convert them into Bitcoin, especially when there's a lot of inflation. Because if there's a lot of inflation, the value of your savings and the value of your assets are falling, basically, right? So it allows you to protect that value by converting into that without having to go through any kind of exchange controls and being able to bypass that. And we saw that a lot in Argentina as well as Cyprus the last couple of years.
So people have been able to get their money out of like the Argentine peso and actually go into the Bitcoin. I guess in the past people have use the dollar.
Use the dollar, but then you have dollar restrictions, and then you're not allowed to do that. And what do you do? So a lot of people have been converting into Bitcoin.
And to some extent, one of the things that's happening is that people are mining these Bitcoins. But actually, so these are a couple of pictures of Bitcoin mining, but the Bitcoin miners are actually helping run the system.
Exactly.
Right? How is that happening?
So it's called Bitcoin mining, but actually what they're doing is they're running the blockchain, the computer program which runs the blockchain, and the blockchain is what verifies all transactions, the peer-to-peer transactions. And the more you run the blockchain on your computer, the more you are rewarded with Bitcoin. So the program creates Bitcoins the more you run that program on your computer. So basically you're doing them a service by being part of the network and watching all these transactions take place around the world, and you're being rewarded by newly created Bitcoins, and that process is called mining. It's called mining,
not actually mining.
Right,
like
you're not really
like
mining.
on the gold mining shows.
No, yeah.
But it is also, I mean, it sounds like another fascinating example of the spontaneous order where people are contributing to the operation of the system.
Yeah, people have the incentive to run the program, and running the program helps the rest of us, right? Because that makes it much safer for the rest of us to use Bitcoin, but then, you know, the people who are running the programs are being paid in Bitcoin. So, you know, the plans are coordinated.
So what are the possible threats to the development, or either it's a current use now as a payment system or as possible growth in the future? What might hold Bitcoin back?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it will be interesting to see what happens going forward. There's not a whole lot of government regulation right now, and a lot of people are watching to see what governments are going to do, you know, in regards to regulating Bitcoin. And that is something that could hamper it. But I think I'm pretty optimistic about Bitcoin going forward, actually. You know, I think we should think of it as a technology, and a technology that helps us to save on certain costs. And, you know, in a technology, there's obviously going to be hurdles and, you know, learning hurdles that we all need to overcome. But I think that the only uncertainty which could be there would be depending on how government really sees and regulates it in the future.
So Bitcoin currently now isn't regulated by?
Not as not really as Bitcoin.
Government.
Yeah, it's regulated under you know, the payment processing rules. So it's not, doesn't have specific regulations which are specific to it.
No, one of the other things that people have remarked about is that it's a method that Bitcoin allows for a way to have somewhat anonymous transactions online in a way that any third-party verified system doesn't. What could be some of the advantages or drawbacks of this anonymity?
Well, I mean, some of the drawbacks have been that, you know, people use it to do illegal things online, and that's you know, a big reason for why, you know, Bitcoin's got a bad rap. And that is true, but it also allows anonymity, and it, you know, there's, you know, you can protect yourself from, you know, a tyrannical government. You can, you know, you can send funds. It helps people who, you know, send money back to their countries. You know, you could do it with Bitcoin. It's much easier, it's safer, it's faster.
And that's actually a fairly important factor here in the United States, although not that many of us recognize. But there are a lot of immigrants working here in the United States who are sending money back to their home, to their families all the time.
And you know, wiring money is expensive, and Bitcoin lets you, I mean, you can, in a second, basically, you know, you do it through your cell phone, you can send money. Right now, we could send money to China, and it would reach there, you know, in less than a minute. And that's for basically no transaction cost. And that's, you know, that's pretty amazing.
Well, and I guess one of the other things that's exciting about this is that it is an open source system, and who knows how the future is going to unfold and how it might develop in the future, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, and people are saying that there's many other applications of Bitcoin. So, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and there's a lot of young, bright entrepreneurs who are investing in it, and you know, and that's really a positive sign. You know, it's hundreds and hundreds of young tech entrepreneurs, bright kids getting into this, and that's really optimistic to see what they come up with.
And I suppose once you get enough people invested in it, it might make it difficult for a government to take too drastic of an action to shut it down.
Yeah, yes, and I think it's already past that point. Actually, I think it's already big enough where a lot of people have, you know, put money into it and now working and doing good things with it, and a lot of good is coming from it. I think it's past the point where governments would want to shut it down.
Well, thank you very much, Mal. Enjoy this conversation. Hopefully, we've been able to learn about an institution that's rapidly evolving and possibly going to change our world economy for the better. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week for another episode of EconVersations.